Okay, so welcome to this week's episode of the Python People podcast. And today, our festive December episode, I'm joined by a very special guest in Manish Patel. Manish, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you.
No problem at all. So Manish, you are, for those people that are yet to have the pleasure, you're the CEO of an AI and machine learning business currently focused on the healthcare space called Driver AI. I guess, well, first and foremost, how's life with you out of lockdown? How have you found it?
So it's been quite a turbulent time, I guess, and I think that's probably the story for most startups at our stage, especially within the space that we're in, where we're looking at cutting edge technologies that require investment and require time, they require human resource, and all of these things seem to have gone up and down during lockdown and during the pandemic. And so there's been it has been a difficult time, but we're getting through it, and startups like us are now seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, I guess, with things getting slightly better. And of course, a vaccine, it's vaccine day today, of course.
Yeah, I know.
So it's we are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel at the moment, and preparing for a time where we can get back to some kind of normality. So all of those things that you find difficult in creating a company and creating a product and getting some traction, all of those things got a lot harder in the last 6 months. And, in varied and imaginative ways, we came across things that we never thought we'd have to deal with so early on. There are the problems of course that all startups have to face at some point, but I think we've gone through this selection pressure, this artificial selection pressure, and I think the startups that will evolve out of this pandemic, again, especially in the space that we're in, this weird nexus between technology and health, we'll be better off for it in the end. And I think if you've survived, if you're listening and you've survived through this pandemic, and you're at a similar stage to us, I think you've done well just to have got through this. And I think the future times, 2021 is going to be it's going to feel a lot easier. I'm hoping. As if you can get through 2020, you'll definitely get through 2021.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like you said, use the term the light at the end of the tunnel, but it really does. I know we've got a long way to go yet, and obviously the vaccination programs that just started today, so it's still going to be many months. But just having that knowledge that there's a vaccine that's actually making its way into the system, I think it's only going to be a good thing for people's the economy and people's kind of mental health, to kind of know that these difficult times might be behind us. But no, I totally agree with you. This year, because obviously True North as a business, we started towards the end of last year, but really only had a few months before the pandemic hit. So I think it definitely it forces you to be quite resourceful, shall we say?
Well, you have to be inventive, don't you? So for yourself, I guess, you're looking for talent and placing that talent in innovative companies, and so you're in a weird situation where you've probably got a lot more people coming in as supply, but not so many people coming in for demand. And you have to be inventive with the way you shape that, and it's the same for us. We have to, we'd love to be able to hire. I would have loved to be able to hire 2 or 3 data scientists, and we've just had to shift things drastically. Even well-established institutions like Innovate UK, right? So we've got an Innovate UK grant, and it is part of a multi-million-pound project that is involving Manchester University and Roche Diagnostics and GE and all sorts of other big players. And even they kind of had to delay 6 to 9 months to start the project because there's disruption all over the place. So we have to be inventive with the way we do things. And like I say, I would have loved to have hired people in the last 6 months, but on the flip side, all of those things that were repressed during this lockdown, I think there's going to be a massive release in 2021. I think there's going to be
Yeah,
a time between January and June of next year, um, where there'll be there'll be an I wouldn't say a multitude of startups getting lots and lots of cash, but there is going to be cash being floated around. There's going to be
yeah,
investment. There's going to be movement, and hopefully there are going to be better times in the
yeah.
first half of that year.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I think this year's caused people to, or forced people to kind of have to pivot, and
Yeah.
obviously sort of think on their feet and
Well, we
adapt
had
to what
to.
the
Yeah.
market's doing. But for a lot of companies, I agree, it hasn't sort of changed the end goal and the end picture. It's just maybe sort of pushing back a little bit. But
Yeah.
now this kind of light is
Exactly.
on the end of the tunnel. It does feel like companies are now starting to really kind of mobilize and think quite seriously about 2021, and sort of really going into it with a high degree of optimism, which is as we are, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, it's like I say, things like, I mean, it sounds really simple, but I'd budgeted some amount of money for having an office that can accommodate, up to 8 or 9 people. That has its associated costs in terms of hardware and infrastructure and that kind of thing. That's now we're probably not looking at doing that for at least a year. But it changes the repertoire of the type of person you're going to bring into the company, and also changes your outlook on and your strategy on how you're going to deliver a product, because now
mm,
you're thinking, well, actually we can probably hire developers that are in the US or in Europe or wherever, and we can we're going to have to invest in technologies like one I discovered, one of my teammates discovered earlier on was a project management tool called AHA, which is I would never have thought of using it, but the fact that we're all remote now, and have to discuss ideas and have to plan things in electronically, basically day in day out, without the possibility of having any meetings for a number of months, means that we have to invest in those kind of things and invest our time in getting those things up and running. And
yeah,
I think that's just the way you build this company, just the way you run this company or your company, has completely changed.
yeah.
Not necessarily for the worse. It's just a matter of adapting
Yeah,
to when,
yeah, I totally
as we
agree. I
go.
think there has been a lot of positive changes I mean, obviously it's been a horrendous year for lots of
Yeah,
reasons, but I think
yeah,
there's been
yeah,
a lot of positive shifts that have happened throughout this year, and a lot of conversations I'm having with CEOs and MDs now about the business. When they are on the other side of this pandemic,
mm,
hardly any of them are thinking about, well, right, we're going to go straight back to the kind of draconian 5 days a week on site in the same office altogether. I think there has been this sort of conscious shift of actually, certainly in the industry you and I are in kind of the data and AI space, people can work really effectively from home, if not more effectively. But I guess, I think we'll end up going to this probably quite sensible hybrid model, where I don't think
yeah,
you can always kind of replace the quality of the interaction you get face to face, being in the same presence as someone else, just from a sort of collaboration and a creativity standpoint. I think there's something to be said about sort of physical proximity, and I think that will always kind of be the case.
absolutely.
But I think 1-2 days a week, probably will do it. And for a lot of companies now, they're kind of happy for people to be based wherever. And I think going back to your point earlier about the market, one of the things it has done, you're totally right. It's as much as it's been a bit of luck of the draw really as to how badly your business model has been affected due to the pandemic. I mean, some industries have been absolutely decimated, like travel and
Yeah,
hospitality and events and
yeah,
that kind of thing. But there's other industries which are booming and doing really, really well, and healthcare is a sort of example of that as well, I
yeah.
guess.
Well,
But
with my other hat on, I have another startup in hospitality, and
oh, right.
I mean, I don't work directly in it too often now, but um, that company, we had, all of our clients were independents and so independent restaurants, bars, pubs. And when lockdown hit in April, almost immediately you just saw this massive impact. And just pulling away from contracts. They didn't want to spend. A lot of them are now out of business, unfortunately. Some of them are coming back just now, trying to get back and up and running before Christmas. But there's been a huge impact in hospitality. It's, these
Yeah.
guys were basically earning just enough money. After they paid their rent and all this kind of stuff, they hardly have enough money to live, right? And so putting a restaurant out of business for 6 months is basically a killer, unless you have
Yeah.
some really big investors or money in the bank that you can rely on to keep things going. Most independents don't. But again, on the flip side, there's also an opportunity here, right? So of course hospitality will eventually recover, but selfishly speaking, from a business perspective, that's an opportunity for us. That's something that we know people are going to need our technology, that we know they're going to want to use remote ordering from mobiles, for example, and that kind of thing. This represents an opportunity for us to fill that gap. And so as entrepreneurs, I guess we just need to be agile to those requirements and be there to help those industries. So yeah, like you say, it's been a horrendous time for a number of reasons. But now that we're hopefully coming nearer to the end of it, it also represents some really big positives and really big opportunities for people like us to fill.
Yeah, totally agree. I think it's a lot of it is an attitude thing, isn't it? Do you look at the glass half empty or half full? And times of change, it does present huge opportunity. And there's been examples of businesses that have just, rightly or wrongly, done incredibly well throughout this time. So it's just about, say, being creative and pivoting. But it's interesting. You've got sort of another startup in the hospitality sector. But tell us a bit about your background then, Manish. Where did you sort of where'd you come from? What's your career to date?
Sure. So as an undergrad sort of molecular geneticist, was in that buzz time of human genome project just
Oh yeah.
about being finished, and so that was the in thing to do. I probably wasn't into it as much as I should have been. I actually earlier in my academic sort of career, uh, I wasn't much of an academic. I was more of a, I
So
was,
was I. I should remember
it was,
that.
I quite liked the idea of becoming, of writing fiction and that kind of stuff. I used to do that as a hobby. I never really had anything published, but,
Cool.
towards the end of my degree, again, that was coinciding with the end of the Human Genome Project. That's when things started to spark in my head with, the, the possibilities for the next 10, 15, 20 years with what the Human Genome Project was now producing was tantalizing, and the scientist in me was suddenly being awakened in that stage. And so we had a plethora of data coming out of the Human Genome Project, and I went on to do bioinformatics, which is this sort of cross between computing and biology, genetics, and engineering, I guess, to some degree, and maths. And so in this master's that I did, we kind of learned about everything from how do we with masses of data from projects such as the Human Genome Project, but then how do we also make use of that scientifically? How do we do in silico simulations, for example, and that kind of thing? And that kind of got me onto the track of complex systems research. Went on to do a PhD in that particular field, where we were simulating behavior of tumors. So how does a tumor grow, and how does it vascularize? How does it respond to treatment? Specifically, we were working on this idea of model integration. And so model integration basically means a repertoire of lots and lots of different sort of mini models, if you like, that describe various aspects of a system. So I had a model that described how a tumor grows as a spheroid, as a basically like a little football. And then I had another model that described, well, how does how does hypoxia work? How does oxygenation within that tumor work? And then how does that affect vascularization of that tumor? How do blood vessels grow within that tumor? And then we had models about mutation of the genes within that tumor, and and so on. And the problem was, well, we got all these different models, and they're all useful in their own right. They all have some clinical value actually in their own right. But how do we get all of those things to cooperate together to give us a bigger, better simulation of the complex system? This idea that it touches on every part. It has touched on every part of my career. It touches on every industry that I've ever sort of either worked in or heard about or read about, or have connections within my own network. You have this incredibly complex system or set of complex systems that are very, very difficult to model by themselves. So what we do naturally as human beings is that we simplify them into these simple verticals, these simple modalities, and we make do with them. We say, okay, I'm just going to model this little thing here, and we're going to make some ROI out of it. Yeah. But we never really, or very rarely, do we think, well, how does that integrate with something else? And then how does that integrated thing integrate with something else? And how does that integrated thing, and so on and so forth? How do we make your models bigger and bigger and bigger over time? And so that's how the idea of Jiva actually started, from those sort of humble beginnings. How do we create multimodal analyses from these single modal models? So that's why I mean that was the focus in our sort of PhD days. Very quickly realized that I couldn't afford a house as an academic. so I sold my soul to the devil, and worked for banks and hedge funds and things. And even in those kind of environments, it was the same situation. You'd create some kind of model, some kind of predictor of, say, a share price, or whether there's going to be a fair value of a non-fair value of a pair of a trading pair. And you want to capitalize on that prediction, and capitalize on that unfairness in the system. But so even there, you're looking at like a very narrow sliver of something that's incredibly complex and almost impossible to simulate as a whole. And I mean, if you could do that in the stock market, if you could do that in the FX market or derivatives market, you'd be you'd be a billionaire overnight.
Yeah, of course.
But it's just again, it's just the nature of the beast. You simplify it, and you just look at one tiny corner of this complex system, and you try to model it, and you try to create some value from just doing that little thing. Whereas the real value, and then we've got the computational power to do things now, these kind of things now, that the real value is making those predictors wider and more applicable to the complex system. So here's what I think we've been going wrong in kind of AI in general. But I'll talk a little bit later when I talk about what we're doing in Jiva. But it's this idea that you can build multimodal predictors from single modal predictors, I think is an opportunity that is currently being missed from the entire AI machine learning space. And so that's where we're concentrating as Jiva. So Jiva is a machine learning platform currently for data-driven healthcare, but actually applicable across the board to all sorts of different industries. We're starting in healthcare purely because it's incredibly complex. The data is complex. The data is not complete. It's highly unstructured, highly varied. So you get handwritten reports to PDFs to numbers in Excel to databases and genomes and proteomes and 3D modeling of protein interactions. The kind of records you're talking about are so diverse, it's unreal. And so our feeling was, myself and the co-founder Chetan, who's actually a friend from university, because we're both from this healthcare background. He's a clinician himself. We felt that if we could do this in healthcare, we could probably do it anywhere, right? So if we
Yeah.
could crack the complexity that we find here, it's probably possible to do it pretty much anywhere else. So that's how we started. We started the company in 2019, early 2019. Very quickly got traction in the prostate cancer space through a number of advisors and mentors. Got the data in, started creating some models, and leaked into other disease areas like liver disease and bone fracture analysis, that kind of thing. And we're now at a place where we have a platform where we can almost create any type of model we want through the magic of essentially Amazon, and be enabling our clients to come in and create their own models of whatever corner of science they work in, and giving them the ability to merge these different modalities together to create better and better predictors. So yeah, that's in a nutshell. That's where we're at. That's what we do as Jiva.
Yeah, that's really interesting actually. And you mentioned something there a little bit earlier on about kind of single predictors and how do you extrapolate that into kind of multiple predictors. But I guess for the people that haven't necessarily come across the concept of multimodality before, I mean, in most kind of machine learning models now, they usually take sort of one form of input, don't they? Either audio, text, or data, or whatever. And the thing that I find most exciting about this whole concept of multimodal machine learning is, when you think, because I did biopsychology at university as well, and a large portion of that is when you're sort of studying intelligence. It's like you can have a certain type of intelligence, but actually the more overarching intelligence is actually being able to be versatile and kind of get the right output or the right result from multiple different situations. And the thing I kind of see that mapping very closely onto this concept of multimodality, where people think that there's a lot of really complex AI models out there, and machine learning sort of in lots of people's eyes really kind of quite advanced. But like I say, when you look at it in terms of real intelligence, is about it's about context, isn't it? About spotting the relationship between those different models. And at the moment, we're kind of really falling short on there's some incredibly complex models, but actually they're only in their own niche or their own right. But actually being able to spot those patterns between, to me, that's kind of a big conscious step towards actual intelligence. Being able to communicate between those and sort of spot the commonality and the kind of common response between them.
So you touched on a really good point there. So I mean, you look at nursery school kids that they go to nursery, they learn various different things at school, but they're able to, even with infantile brains, they're able to join the dots together. They're able to put things together that they learn in their virtual maths class or their virtual English class, or they're able to put these things together in their brains quite nicely and neatly, and the brain's very good at doing that. And I think that's what we're missing in machine learning, is this fundamental principle through which we can put different modalities together. And the best we can do at the moment is ensemble learning, right? So in ensemble learning, I mean, there are various ways of doing it, but essentially what you're saying is, well, you'll take output from one model and output from another, and then you'll decide which one is right, or how right is one compared to the other, and that's as good as you can get. But what we're talking about here are the fundamentals to what I think would be an absolute requirement to create more general AIs, right? To create this true intelligence, this machine that is able to exhibit true intelligence, it would need to be able to bridge between those modalities. It would need to be able to reason in that particular way. And I think that's the only way to be able to do that, is to work on this. Work on frameworks in which we can build multimodal systems. Otherwise, I don't see how we can do it. I mean, as a point of fact, let's look at GPT-3, right? GPT-3. So I mean, it's pretty amazing when you look at the results. You have this machine almost creating poetry and things like this. And sure, it gets a few things wrong here and there, and sometimes it doesn't really make much sense. But what is it really doing under the hood? And again, I'm not gonna sort of try to make a negative out of this, because it is an amazing achievement what they've achieved with GPT-3, but it's essentially ingested the entire English language and memorized how words follow one another. It hasn't really understood the context, hasn't really understood what it's saying. It doesn't really understand what a poem is. It doesn't really understand what a story is. It might understand to some extent that a story has a beginning, middle, and end, I guess. But again, that's because it's memorized, essentially memorized sequences of words. And so it doesn't really go far enough. What I'm saying is, if we were to create another GPT-3, a facsimile of GPT-3, I think a better way to do it would be, why aren't we learning smaller parts of this complex whole? So why aren't we learning things like grammar, things like I don't know, the facets of poetry, that kind of thing. We learn this, you learn bits of information separately, and develop the understanding and develop the framework to put all of those models together. And I think the sum would be much greater than its parts, in that respect. And that's essentially what we're trying to do here. We're trying to create multimodal systems and try to make the whole greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, it's I find it an absolutely fascinating subject. To say, from kind of from university, the part of I enjoyed most was about memory formation, and kind of, and just the different structure of the brain and the way it works. And I was having this conversation with someone the other day that was talking about, for and this is kind of, I guess, where the lines get blurred when we sort of fast forward into the future and we think about all these kind of robots and how they interact like humans, and it's all sort of seamless. But if you think about the complexity of just trying to recreate that human intelligence, and I think that's where the fundamental difference lies between humans as a biological entity and machines as a digital entity. We as humans, we learn from the world through our interaction with the world, but we learn from an external stimulus, something happens, and then there's an emotional response. And that's the kind of difference, that we learn by something happens, and then the degree to that emotional response is how poignant the memory is. And that's kind of how we learn sort of context. Something happens, you've got your amygdala, which is the sort of part of the brain which is emotional, and it's right next to the lateral hippocampus, which is the part of your brain that stores memory. And as humans, we've got that ability to obviously differentiate between that in a real world scenario of kind of how we navigate our way through the world. But obviously within a system and a kind of a binary kind of digital algorithm, whatever, it's so difficult to be able to program that complexity or that kind of emotional response, to actually pick up on the links between the two different modes, isn't it?
And to add to that, your reaction to experience will be different to my reaction to experience, and our memories of that particular experience, even though that experience might be identical, might be very, very different. And I find that fascinating. I mean, we wouldn't be able to create. I don't think would be able to create an artificial super intelligence or general intelligence, whatever crazy kids are calling it nowadays, purely by learning from human behavior. It would have to be almost organic. And for it to be organic, there would need to be this principle of how it puts context onto those experiences, and how it actually builds the reaction to that. And there are so many different levers and cogwheels moving here. It's crazy. I think the next 10, 15 years in this space will be really, really interesting, especially if we start to look at things towards the multimodality aspect of AI. I do think as a community, look, 90% of the world is currently using some kind of neural network-based machine learning, so deep learning or whatever. 10% of the world uses Bayesian methodologies. Neither really put a lot of emphasis on this multimodal aspect, this framework to get these things working together. I think we're going down a rabbit hole. I think at some point we're going to have to start acknowledging that you never have a full data set to begin with
Mm.
to learn. You're always going to have partial data sets, and therefore you have to learn partial data sets and somehow integrate those at the AI level rather than integrating data and creating AIs. Is kind of putting the entropy somewhere else. So the way people have thought about this before is, well, we can get multimodal AIs by saying, well, we can get data over here and data over here, which are different modalities. We'll integrate the data and then create an AI on top of that. Okay, that's fine. Okay, you can do that. But in reality, those two data sets might not even exist at the same time. You might just have one for a number of years. Look at healthcare. You might just have, blood serum data for years and years and years in your data set. And only recently do you have MRI data or something like this to augment it, to give you a better diagnosis of a cancer.
Mm.
And so reality doesn't work like that. Reality doesn't conform to be able to merge different data sets together. All the time. So I think we are going to have to work on this framework that AIs together rather than data sets together.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's obviously a huge way to go. Like, so when you break it down like that, and you realise just the sheer scale of the task that's ahead of us. But I still feel like, the next 10, 15 years, like I say, it's an incredibly exciting space because as far as we feel like we get up and we talk to Alexa, and we kind of have that is already part of our lives, I guess, isn't it? That sort of that machine interaction. We're still only scratching the surface insofar as how far we've got left to go, and that's why I think it's an incredible. That's why why I focus True specifically on this area, because I think the one thing we can't move or really hide from is that from a commercial perspective, AI in whatever guise it exists now is very much alive and kicking insofar as it is solving people's problems in a much more automated and efficient manner than we've ever been able to do it before. And I think that's why, just purely from a money in the bank account situation, it's obviously not going anywhere. It's only going to increase, as time goes on. But to think about these kind of bigger ethical issues and sort of social impact, and like I say within healthcare in particular, it's just really, really exciting to see the kind of breakthroughs that I think it genuinely will have in the positive impact it's going to have on the world.
I mean, just look at one of the projects that we're working on is prostate cancer diagnosis, and some of the stats when we were doing the modeling on this. So not the diagnostic modeling. I mean the health economics modeling around this. Some of the numbers are just mind-blowing, right? So number of prostate cancer diagnoses overtook breast cancer for the first time in the UK in 2020. So it's a incredibly prevalent cancer, second biggest killer of men globally. So some of these little facts, like if I'm 65 years old, I probably have prostate cancer, but the likelihood is I'll probably die of something else. But if I do have cancer and it does become aggressive, then it's actually very treatable so long as it's treated early. And so the impact you can have on society by just simply creating a better diagnostic of prostate cancer is huge. We're currently working on this diagnostic. The current clinical pathway is currently that you have a PSA test, which is like PSA is basically this molecule that flies around in your blood, and if it's elevated to a certain degree, then it's indicative of having prostate cancer, but it's not very specific. It's not a very good indicator as such by itself. And so you have a scan, and then even in the scan, 60 to 65% of scans are indeterminate. So radiologist or the MDT, the multidisciplinary team, can't specifically tell whether there's a cancer that needs to be operated on or needs to be treated. And so that person will go for a biopsy. And remember, we're talking about generally talking about elderly men here. They're already immunocompromised to some extent. Up to 80% get some kind of minor complication due to the biopsy, 50% get something more serious, and 2% can end up getting sepsis, and that's life-threatening. So avoiding biopsies especially when you don't actually have cancer, is imperative. It costs the healthcare system millions and millions and millions of pounds. It costs the US system $3 billion plus in terms of side effects. So something as simple as just a severity score or an aid for the radiologist to say, well, did you look at this particular area of the scan, or I think this particular part of the scan looks very, very suspicious, or not very suspicious. Those kind of visual aids can have a huge impact on healthcare, even if we're able to reduce the throughput of false positives of biopsies by 10%. That represents millions of pounds of savings. It represents thousands of lives that don't, either saved or don't have to go through a lot of pain and suffering. One of the big things that came out through our analysis was that the majority of complaints about the whole process in prostate cancer in the UK, was the fact that men had to wait a long time, up to 5 to 6 weeks, to get the results of a scan. And that's because of this huge backlog. Right? The radiologists are overwhelmed with work. There is a massive shortage of radiologists, and therefore there's this huge burgeoning sort of mental health issue with men that are just waiting to get a scan, and it's a very, very horrible situation that is now only going to get worse because of COVID, because hundreds of men during lockdown didn't have their scans. They are now gonna hit the hospitals early next year, and that's going to cause huge disruption. It's going to cause a huge backlog. It will make it even worse. And so, yeah, we need anything that can help us alleviate that burden on the NHS and all healthcare systems globally. It would be a very positive thing. And I think that's where the opportunity is for AI in healthcare. It's definitely in this post-pandemic era. There is definitely an opportunity here for us to make a positive impact, both on society, human health, and in terms of finances for healthcare systems.
Yeah, totally agree. And unfortunately, I kind of know what you're talking about, firsthand. Really, we had a loss in the family. Actually, my uncle was my mum's cousin only a few weeks ago, and it's the exact scenario you just mentioned. Unfortunately, he was being treated for a water infection, throughout the majority of the first lockdown, only to come out of the second lockdown and realise that it was advanced stage cancer. It just wasn't picked up early enough, and really quite a young, fit guy, sort of 62. It's exactly what you've just mentioned there, and I think any kind of like I say, any help we can get to expedite that process and avoid what I know it's been an extremely difficult time for the NHS, and obviously you can't sort of underestimate that. But it has had huge impacts, repercussions for other illnesses, and any sort of support we can offer to create systems and sort of use that computing power, like you say, in an effective way to avoid those kind of situations. It's literally going to save millions of lives, isn't it? And
it is definitely, and we have to take advantage of this. We have to take advantage of the fact that the NHS is such an amazing institution that there's a plethora of data there. There's a plethora of expertise there. The UK is in a unique position to offer these kind of technologies, right? We have this amazing sort of conglomeration of data, healthcare expertise, computer science expertise, academics, and the will in the form of NHSX and the AI Council to actually produce these kind of diagnostics and produce not even diagnostics. Diagnostics is just one small part of it. Any sort of analytics within healthcare to make the world a better place. And it sounds like a platitude, but it's it really is an opportunity that we can service, and we should.
Yeah, totally agree.
That's one of our missions as Achievers is to be able to do that, is to democratize the use of multimodal AI and just make that available to everyone to use.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you on behalf of everybody for all the good work you're doing, and definitely keep up. It's really admirable, and I think it's such a great thing to be doing on a daily basis, and the level of kind of fulfillment you must get off the back of the work you're doing. It's super.
Well, it's better than working in a bank. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, I bet.
Not to disparage that, but it's a lot more fulfilling, that's for sure. Being able to, well, there's two things, right? Working in your own startup, it has its own merits and rewards, but it also obviously its own pains, its own unique pains. But being able to do it in a way that is benefiting other people is definitely something that is irreplaceable. There's no, I'll take an example of my CTO, Richard, who joined us a couple of months ago, or 2 or 3 months ago, and one of the main reasons he joined, or at least one of the main reasons I felt he joined, was obviously, it's not the money, because you don't get more money in a startup. One of the things is the technology that you work with, and just the vision, but it's also what you're doing, right, within healthcare, and the impacts you're having within healthcare. And he said that on a couple of occasions, that the impact is a big deal for him. And I think that's incredibly important to work in something where you can have a societal impact. That's important to me anyway. That we have some kind of impact on, some kind of positive impact on society in the world.
Yeah.
I only wish we were working on the vaccine and got the vaccine in first, but we didn't, unfortunately.
As a lot of people do, I guess. But
Yeah.
no, I totally agree. I think 2020 for all its ups and downs, I think it has helped a lot of people kind of really put a magnifying glass over their life of what's truly important, and kind of reevaluate their priorities in life. And I think a lot of people now are moving away from doing a job for the sake of doing a job, or doing a job because purely for the money, to actually I'm doing this for other reasons that I find way more fulfilling than a bit more money in my bank account at the end of every month. So no, exactly. I totally relate to that. So lovely. Well, Manish, it's been absolutely awesome speaking to you. Really enjoyed the chat. I found it really interesting. And I like to end every podcast with asking a question that I actually stole from a book I read. I don't know if you read it, by a guy called Rich Reeves. If I could tell you one thing, where he basically went around loads of famous people and celebrities and just asked them for their one favorite piece of advice. So if I may, I'd like to ask you, have you got a favorite piece of advice that you could share with the listeners?
Yeah. Don't be afraid to ask for help, I think, is the main one.
Good on.
It's so I say that from a startup perspective, but also like just career building and virtually every stage of my life. Earlier in my career, I was probably a little bit too shy and didn't ask for help early enough, and I suffered for it. And so no questions are stupid questions. You shouldn't just be confident about your own ability, and if you don't understand something, or you don't get why you're doing something, or you don't get the full vision, or whatever it is, don't be afraid to ask for help, because the earlier you do that, the better it is for you.
What a great note to end on. Well, Manish, all I can do is say thank you very much again for your time. It's been fantastic speaking to you, and I'm really, really excited to hear about the next sort of steps for Jiva AI. So best of luck with it all. Let us know how you get on, and hopefully you can pop back on, do another episode with us in the not too distant future when we've got a bit more to chat about in future, I guess.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity.
No worries at all. Take care.
Cheers.
Bye for now.
Cheers.